Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Immigration ABC's podcast. My name is Dustin Saldarriaga. I'm an immigration lawyer with Scott Legal PC in New York City. And today we have a special guest, my colleague, Michaela Romesser. Michaela graduated from Charles University in Prague, Czech Republic. While there, she interned at the Organization for Aid to Refugees in Prague, where she managed legal support for clients who were applying for asylum and protection in the Czech Republic. She also interned at the corporate department of Clifford Chance. She's been with Scott Legal PC for a number of years and brings a wealth of experience in a variety of visas, both permanent resident, green card options, as well as non-immigrant temporary options. And we are very honored to have her on the podcast today to focus on and share with us her experience regarding TN visas. So Michaela, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us today. To start, I was wondering, could you share a little bit about your personal journey into immigration law? How did you get here to Scott Legal PC and to join us today on the podcast?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dustin, for having me today. I'm originally from Slovakia, and after high school, I applied, and I was accepted to the Charles University in Prague in the Czech Republic. So my first kind of, immigration was from Slovakia to the Czech Republic, but it's, those are neighboring countries, and the immigration in Europe, it's, within the European Union, it's much easier than, coming to the US. But that was the first thing. Later, while I was at the Charles University in Prague, I think it was like in my second or third year at the university, me and my best friend, we kind of heard about this J1 work and travel program. So it basically allows foreign students who are studying at foreign universities to come to the US for summer for 2 or 3 months during your summer break. You can find kind of like a temporary job in the US, and then after you finish working, you can travel in the US. So we kind of heard about the program, and we decided this sounds great, this sounds adventurous, let's do it. So we contacted this agency. This whole process, it has to be done through like one of the agencies, licensed by the U.S. government. So we applied, we got the DS 2019 form, we scheduled our interviews at the U.S. consulate in Prague, and we went for the J1 visa interview. So that was kind of like my first experience, kind of like applying for a visa at a consulate, and and coming to the U.S. So we spent the summer here. It was a great experience. And then later, while I was still studying at the Charles University, I kind of heard about this exchange program between Charles University and one of the universities in Florida, like a law school. Anyone at Charles University, like any of the students, like you could sign up for this seminar about like the U.S. law. And at the end, there was a final exam, and out of the 50 or so students, they selected 4 students who could come to the U.S. and do like a 1 semester at a U.S. law school. So I signed up, and then I was one of the 4 people selected, and I was very excited. So then I came to the U.S. on the F1 visa. So I went through the whole process, of applying for the I-20. I had an interview, a consular interview for the F1 visa, again at the consulate in Prague, and then I came to the U.S. on the F1. And then after that, I went back to Prague, and I finished law school there. And eventually I moved here again and kind of like did like 3 remaining semesters of U.S. law school, and then got my law degree. And again, I was here on the F1 visa. So I'm quite familiar with kind of like the whole, like all the F1 regulations, the I-20, like what job you are allowed to do, what job you are not allowed to do, like what you need authorization for. So definitely, like F1 visa, I have some personal experience with. And then, later I got sponsored for a family-based green card petition by my spouse. So I went through the whole process of, filing a petition, I-485 petition, and the I-130 petition with USCIS. So eventually I got my green card. Then I went through the I-751 process of removing the conditions on the green card, and eventually I got my U.S. citizenship. So definitely my personal journey or like experience with the U.S. immigration, it varied from J1, F1 up until becoming a U.S. citizenship. So it's great, and I'm always happy to share my personal experience with like any of these visas or any of this process with our clients.
That's awesome. Well, first of all, Michaela, congratulations. I know it's been a long process, but it ended in clear success with naturalization and U.S. citizenship. And it makes me realize we have to have you back to speak on a number of topics. I think in particular, I'm curious about the J1 because the J1 has a number of interesting aspects to it. And I also feel like it can be used in different ways, and some of those ways are underutilized. So I'd love to have you back to talk about
definitely.
that. So let me dig into one thing that you mentioned there, which is how your personal experience influences how you work with clients. Could you say a little bit more about that? When you have a client at the other end of the phone line or the other end of an email or, interacting with you, and you're working with them to develop this process, to help them navigate the process. How do you think your personal experience shapes that?
Yeah, definitely. So I definitely, our clients and, basically anyone applying for a visa or, like coming to the US and having interaction with CBP, people are often nervous. And I understand that because it can be, it's a stressful experience. Like people are nervous, like I was nervous. So I definitely understand that. But I try, to make our clients have interview preparations with them to make them, kind of more relaxed and kind of like comfortable. So I think like my experience, my personal experience kind of like definitely kind of helps with that. Another thing is, for example, like when I was going through the green card process, there is a period of time, when you file for a green card, then you have to wait for advance parole document. And, like until you have the document, you are not allowed to leave the United States. Otherwise, your petition would be deemed abandoned. So, and I was kind of in the same situation, like you have weddings, you have family engagements, and people want to travel and don't want to be kind of stuck in the country, for 6 to 12 months. So, like when people complain, I do understand that, like I was in the same situation. There are some scenarios when you can file for a kind of expedite request and try to kind of like speed up the process. The instances are kind of limited, but when I hear our clients complain, I definitely kind of understand how they feel. And another kind of like interesting personal experience also with the advance parole was, like when you travel on the advance parole and you kind of travel internationally and you kind of like try to do a check-in at the airline, like it never, when I was doing it for the first time, I was like, because there are like some options, like you have a ESTA visa or you are a green card holder. And I was like never able to check in. So you always have to come to the airport like in advance. You have to explain to them, you have to show them the EAD, and if it has at the bottom like serves as advance parole, you have to point the person to that part, like this is the advance parole, this is my document, and you have to like sometimes advocate for yourself, explain like what document you are traveling on. But this was my personal experience, and then I wrote a blog post on this, and now I send it to every client, like traveling on the advance parole, so they know, so they're not surprised when trying to do the check-in. They kind of know what to expect and kind of like what to do when coming back to the U.S.
Absolutely. I think you're pointing to a really important aspect of the work we do, which is that as lawyers, we need to know what the law is, but immigration is somewhat unique in that it's so dependent on individual people. And even if the law says something, if the person representing the airline feels a certain way, then in some ways the law becomes secondary to that. And it's the same with the consular officer or the Customs and Border Protection officer, where you have seen the role of the human and you're helping clients take that into account. It's not just about the law. It is about how do you work with all the humans that you have to interact with at each step of the process. So that's invaluable. Well, today we're going to talk about one of the most common visas that our firm helps clients with. And I think you agree, there's very good reason for the TN being such a popular option. And just as background, the TN visa is a visa option for nationals of Canada or Mexico. It was established by NAFTA, the agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico. And in summary, what the TN is and what NAFTA did was make it easier for nationals of those three countries, Canada, Mexico, the US, to travel between the borders of those three countries to work. So when it comes to the TN in the US, it basically makes it easier for nationals of Canada or Mexico to come to the US to work. Now, Michaela, when focusing on why the TN is one of the most popular visa options at our firm, why do you think that is? Why do you think the TN is so popular?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple reasons for that. So I think number one is, there is no kind of numerical limitation as to like how many TN visas can be issued each year. So there are some visas in the US, the H-1B visa, for that visa, the government can only adjudicate 85,000 petitions, for per year. And for TN, there is no such limitation. So I think that's kind of like, that's number one. The second one, I think, you can renew the TN, as many times as you want. So again, there are some visas, such as, for example, the H-1B or L, where you're kind of like limited as to how many times you can renew them or how many years you can be in status on H-1B or L. With TNs, there is no such limitation. So, you could renew them, you could renew the TN visa as many times as you want, with one caveat that at some point, the TN visa is a non-immigrant visa. So you have to show that you are coming to the US temporarily and you have intent to return to your home country. So I think, if you have been living in the US for 15 years or more, at some point, it will be more difficult for you to argue that the stay is temporary and you do plan to return to your home country. The next another reason why I think it's just so popular for Canadian and Mexican nationals is that the procedure, how to apply and how to get the visa or the status is just so simple. So, for most of the employment-based visas in the US, it's just the process is so lengthy, it's very costly. The US employer has to file, petition with the USCIS. Sometimes they have to file labor condition application with the Department of Labor. And for the TN, for Canadians, so Canadians can just go and apply at the border. So they just need certain documents with them, and if they have them, they just go to the border, apply, and they will know right away at the end of the interview whether they are approved or not. For Mexicans, it's a little bit more complex, but still, there doesn't have to be any petition filed with USCIS. Mexican nationals just apply at the consulate, so they submit the DS-160 form, they pay the visa fee, and then they bring all the supporting documents to the interview. So, so that's kind of like another benefit, is just the process to apply is, much more simple than for other visas or green cards. And then the last one would be, I think, the employer compliance and kind of like the employer's obligations. So, for for example, for like H-1B visa or like PERM based green cards, the U.S. employer has so many obligations, like so many things they have to do, like for example, for a green card, they have to test the labor market. They have to see like if there is any willing, qualified and able U.S. worker who wants to do the job. And if there is, you have to stop with the perm process. For H-1B, there are certain wage, the employer has to pay you certain wage. They have to file labor condition application and all these, like compliance they have to do with the Department of Labor. For a TN, there is none of that. So, for TN, like the only thing that the U.S. employer has to do is they have to sign the TN letter, which describes, the applicant's qualifications, the job the applicant will be doing in the U.S., the salary, the job location. So they do have to sign the letter, but and mail the original letter to the applicant, but they don't have to file any petition, and they don't have to kind of pay any filing fee or for any petition, like unless you are applying with USCIS.
Perfect. Three very clear benefits of the TN, and we'll actually be going into each of those in more depth through this episode. One thing I did want to quickly follow up with you on is when we say that the TN is for nationals of Mexico or Canada, that is the country that they have a passport from. That is not the country where they were born. And part of the reason I want to emphasize that is even this morning, I actually was speaking with a client who was born in India and has a passport from Canada. And because he has a passport from Canada, is clearly eligible for a TN, but he did have the question, what does the process of going from a TN to a green card look like? And we did have to talk about if he applies for a green card, he would be applying as an Indian, which does impact the wait time due to the availability of green cards. But that Michaela, we will talk a little bit later about moving from a TN to a green card, and we'll have separate podcast episodes talking about those green card options. But for now, really the important takeaway of what I'm trying to say is that for a TN, it's what your passport says. And if you have a passport from Canada or Mexico, you qualify insofar as that nationality requirement. But Michaela, what about the other requirements for a TN? What types of professions are available or included in the TN, and how do you prove that you meet those requirements?
Yeah. So your profession must appear on the list of professions in the TN regulations. So some professions that are listed in this list are, for example, accountant, architect, computer system analyst, engineer, graphic designer, interior designer, lawyer, dentist, physician. So there are many professions that are included, but not all possible professions are included in this list. So you would want to definitely take a look and see if your profession would kind of fall under this list. And then for each profession in the regulation, you have listed as to kind of like what education or kind of you have to qualify under that profession. So I will say for the vast majority of the professions, you have to have at least a bachelor's degree. There are some, and I will talk a little bit more about this, is management consultant category. So for the management consultant, it's one of the very few kind of categories where you can qualify based only on your work experience. So you still can qualify based on your education, but you can also qualify if you have 5 years of experience as a management consultant or 5 years of experience working in your kind of particular industry. So you would want to review the list of professions and then kind of like qualifications you have to have for the profession. And then another important thing to keep in mind is that, at the time you are applying for a TN, you already have to have a job offered from a U.S. employer. So, you cannot come to the US and search for a job in the US. You could do that potentially on a B visa or ESTA, but for the TN, you already have to have a job arranged at the time of your interview.
Perfect. And when you say that your occupation needs to fall into certain categories, those categories are listed in the TN regulations. There are several dozen occupations, but is that your occupation in Canada or Mexico, or is that the occupation that you're coming to the US to do?
Yeah, so that would be the occupation you are coming to, to do in the US.
Okay. And what about when you get to the US? What about the job duties you're actually performing for the employer? How do you know that your job duties in the US are actually what the government thinks someone in that occupation does? So, for example, if you're applying for a TN as a lawyer, how do you tell the border officer, that your job duties in the US are actually what that CBP officer thinks a lawyer should be doing in the US?
Yeah, so, and for this, the TN employment letter that is signed by the employer, it's extremely, it's the most important part of your application, because the TN letter explains in detail, what the U.S. company do, what you will be doing in the U.S., kind of describes your job duties in detail. So you would definitely want to spend some time kind of putting the TN letter together and have an immigration attorney review the letter. And then what the government does is they look at the job duties, and they, sometimes even during the interview, they just like pull up the Department of Labor, the occupational handbook, and they look, okay, you are saying you are coming as a lawyer, these are the job duties. Then they pull up the occupational handbook, and they, that lists kind of like what lawyers usually do, and then they look at the duties, and if it kind of aligns, then they're comfortable kind of concluding that you qualify. I would say like generally for jobs, like lawyers, it's kind of clear to the officers like what the job duties usually are. I would say they usually pull up the job descriptions for kind of like more complex, more complex or like kind of like more difficult for them to kind of understand like what the person does, like economists, like computer system analysts. So for those type of jobs, they pull up the job description, but at the Department of Labor website, they look at your job duties, and then they kind of make that determination. One tip I just wanted to provide is that you always want to make the job description kind of in a language, like a person like outside your field, like when someone outside your field will look at the job description, they will understand what you will be doing. Because even sometimes, we receive a job description and I look at it and it's even hard for me to understand what the person will be doing. So then that's kind of like one comment we sometimes send to people is just make it more simple. So because the officer is not an expert in all of those different fields. So just kind of make the job description kind of easy for people outside your profession to understand.
That's a great piece of advice. Assume that the person reading the letter is a 14-year-old, right? Yeah. And you're explaining to them, here's what I do, here's why the company in the US needs me, here's what I'll be doing for them. I think it's helpful to imagine that it's a 14-year-old at the other side of the table, and you really have to hold their hand through it. And you mentioned the Occupational Outlook Handbook. That's a really key resource. So the shorthand, you might hear people call that OOH. It's published by, as Michaela said, the U.S. Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics. So, if you're coming to the U.S. to work as a lawyer, an accountant, a veterinarian, what we always will go to the OOH and just look at what those job duties are and make sure that what you're telling CBP or the consulate that you're going to be doing is consistent, because if you don't, there's a good chance the officer is going to say, well, you might be telling me you're coming to the US to work as an accountant, but your job duties don't show that. Excellent points, Michaela, of course. So tell me about what are the requirements or rather, what is the definition of a U.S. employer? So you said before you need to have a job offer. You need to have that in hand before you apply for the TN. Who can issue that job offer? Who is a U.S. employer?
Yeah, so basically, any U.S. company can sponsor you. So this can also be a sole proprietorship, LLC, corporation. One thing that is, not allowed on the TN is to come, like, let's say that you set up a company in the U.S., you own 100% in that company, and then, you want that company to sponsor you for a TN visa. So that will not work. And this is called self-employment. And it will not work, just because you have kind of that controlling interest in the company, and you would not be able to kind of show that there is employer-employee relationship, between the company and you. So, it's generally fine, like if you own some stake in the company, like minority stake or just not controlling stake, and there is someone else in the company, who will be kind of, managing your employment in the U.S., but the scenario like where you would own 100% and or any like majority interest would not work for the TN.
Perfect. So for those who don't want to come to the U.S. to work for someone else, but would rather work for themselves, what visas do you typically point them to?
Yeah, and this is a great question, and it comes up often at during consultations. So one option would be, for example, an E2 visa. So if you're an entrepreneur, you want to set up a company in the U.S., you want to work for a company. One option may be the E2 visa. So the E2 visa is an investor visa. So you would have to invest a substantial amount of money in the U.S., set up an entity in the U.S., and then you could basically like manage the operations of that entity in the U.S. And we have a lot of webinars and kind of YouTube videos on the E2 visa. So that could definitely be one option. O1 visa could potentially be an option as well, because self-employment, it's not really an issue for the O1. So that could be an option. Possibly E1 3D trader visa could be an option. So those are some options that come to my mind.
Perfect. One of the common questions we get, and it is a little bit tricky, is you mentioned before in terms of how you qualify for a job, that you first need to find your occupation. And then when you look at the TN regulations, and again, if you want to look up the TN regulations, it's very easy to do so. You can just Google NAFTA, NAFTA, TN regulations. And one of the first three links is going to be a link to the actual regulations. And what you'll see is a list of each occupation. Again, there are several dozens of them. And with each occupation, you'll see that you qualify based on typically either a degree, a license, or experience. So, Michaela, my question is, and this comes up a lot, if you qualify for an occupation based on your degree, how closely does your degree need to be related to the job you're coming to the U.S. to do? And just to give you an example, if you're coming to the U.S. to work as an economist, can you have a degree in English or a degree in finance? What would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I would say like the general thought is that it has to make sense. So, like sometimes people study even like accounting or like economics, and then like as their hobby they start, for example, like doing like interior design, and then there is a TN category for interior designer, and then they come to us and they like, look, like I have a bachelor, the regulations only say bachelor's degree. I have a bachelor's degree, it's in finance or accounting, and I want to come to the US to work as an interior designer. Is this possible? So so the main idea is like the degree, like the relationship between the degree and the kind of like the job, there has to be some relation. So, if the courses you took are all kind of finance related, and you never took a course in interior design, like you wouldn't be able to qualify for the interior designer TN category. So there has to be some, we have to be able to point either like to the major or to some courses you took, in school. We would point to the transcript, like to specific courses, and then like make the argument like, look, like if someone has a major, like let's say like someone has a major in economics and they're coming to do economics job, like we usually don't even get into that much detail to the transcript. Like we just point like this is the major, we include the transcript and this is the job because it's very clear. When it's kind of like borderline, we do like to point to like specific courses. We also like to, kind of explain, like what the person kind of like learned during the courses. So, we sometimes go to like the school's website and pull up kind of like the description and kind of explain, like this is the specific knowledge I learned at these courses and it's related to the US job, and I will be using this knowledge to perform like these job duties. So we definitely do like some kind of borderline cases where the major is kind of like not in the exact same area, but we are able to point at least to like some courses the person took. If the education and the job in the US are just kind of like completely unrelated, then it's just not really possible to make an argument that you are a professional and the education you obtained is allowing you to perform the job duties in the US. And just one other quick thing I wanted to mention is that for some visas, like for example H-1B, for H-1B as well, you have to have at least a bachelor's degree. But for H-1B, you can substitute the degree with your experience. So for every year of the education, if you can show that you have at least three years of experience, so if you can show that you have 12 years of progressive work experience, you could, and you get a letter from a certain qualified person to make that conclusion, you could still qualify for the H-1B based just on the work experience. For the TN, that's not allowed, and it's kind of specific and kind of clear in the regulation. You cannot substitute the degree with your experience, or like let's say that you did like 2 years of college and then you have some work experience and you want to combine those two. For TN, for H-1B that may work, but for TN that would not.
I really like what you said about it just has to make sense.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, again, it's the person that you're in front of, whether that's a border officer, whether that's a consular officer, but you do need something there, whether it's a transcript showing related courses so that you can explain to them, and the employer letter that you described before shows that this does make sense. There's a reason why this person is coming to the US to work in interior design, even though their degree is only distantly related. And of course, as you said, sometimes there just is nothing to base that argument on. So in those cases, and those cases are not common, I will say. I think usually we are able to work with clients to find some connection. But in the very rare cases where there's just not a TN possibility, then we'll work with them on another visa option. So, Michaela, I did want to quickly add, you brought up some great tactics using a transcript going into the actual courses, even if the major may not be related to the TN job. Something else we once did that I thought was interesting was actually going to the school. You mentioned going to the website, going to a dean, going to a professor, and seeing if that professor would be willing to write a letter to say, I taught this individual a certain course, and the intention of that was to prepare them to do X. And if doing X is what they want to come to the US to do, that letter could be also important. Again, these are cases where you're really trying to find that connection. So, Michaela, you mentioned the employer letter. The employer letter, you said, a key part of the TN application. What other pieces of the application are there? If someone's going to the consulate or going to the border, what would they bring with them in addition to that employer letter?
Yeah, so, and for the employer letter, I think I mentioned it quickly in the beginning, but one extremely important thing is that you have to have the original letter with you, and this is very important, like when you are kind of like planning, like when you plan to apply for the TN, because the US employer, they have to mail you the original letter, either to Canada or Mexico if you are abroad. But you do have to have the original. Sometimes we have people like saying, oh, I called to the CBP, specific port of entry, and they told me, I can have, scanned copy. We have had cases when, one CBP officer told this, and then they show up at the border and another officer wanted to see the original. So our advice is to always bring the original, because if you don't have it, then, they may just kind of deny you or send you home on the spot, and then you have to reapply. So you do have to have the original. Another important thing for the TN letter is that, it has to have specific information. So it has to have, obvious information about the job, detailed job duties. It should list your salary. It should list the kind of the location, like where you'll be working from. It should have some basic information about the US company, so like the officer understands what the employer is doing in the US, and some information as to like how many employees the company has, just to give the officer an idea, like, okay, is this like a large company, is the small company? And it's always good to include the company's website on the letter. So, if the officer, like wants to check whether, this is kind of like a real job offer, like does this company really exist? They have the website, so they can kind of quickly check it. And then it should also have a section kind of explaining your background, your qualification. And really importantly, it should also have the TN specific profession under which you want to apply, because sometimes, it's just not, like in the letter, or, so you just kind of like want to like make the letter like really easy for the officer to review. So just put it in the beginning, like this is the category I want to apply under. This is my education, this is the job. The TN letter, I think generally it should have like, it should be like 2-3 pages long, like not super long, because the officer is not going to read like a 10-page document. So you want to make it kind of brief, on point, but also include like all the information it needs to have. So that would be the one important document to have. Another one obviously would be your passport. And then you have to have, if you are qualifying based on your education, you do have to have the original diploma and the original transcripts. And again, sometimes people say, oh, like my friend, applied and they only had copies and they were approved. Sometimes that may be the case, but some CBP officers or consular officers are just, like very particular. And in our experience, most of them, they do want to see the originals, because again, like they want to make sure that, you do have the education, so that they do want to see the original diploma and the original transcripts. In case you are, you're qualifying under work experience, for example, like under the management consultant category, then you would want to have kind of letters from your previous employers, attesting, to your work experience. So in that case, you would want to bring those letters with you to the interview.
Excellent advice. Let's take a little bit of a step back, or shift gears, and talk about the application process. So one interesting thing about the TN is that there are really 3 ways to get TN status. 3 ways are available to Canadians. 2 of those ways are available to nationals of Mexico. So why don't we start there? And Michaela, I'll ask you to just briefly describe the 2 options that are available to nationals of Mexico who want to apply for TN status.
Yeah, so Mexican nationals can either apply for the TN visa at a consulate in Mexico, or they can apply through USCIS. I think like the most common option would be to apply at a consulate, just because, in that case you would be issued a visa. that would allow you to travel, internationally. So I would say like most, in our experience, most people apply the consulate. In some cases, like when people are here on another status, or they're already here on the TN, then they want to extend status, they could apply with USCIS. Sometimes this is a good option if you want to start working for the employer very soon. So I would say that the current timelines at consulates are around maybe like 3, 4, 5 months. So like, let's say that you want to start working as soon as possible, then filing a USCIS petition if you are already in the US may be a better option. So yeah, those are the two options, but I will say that the majority of the people will apply at a consulate. So if you do apply at a consulate, then the procedure for that would be you would have to submit a DS-160 form, you would have to pay a TN visa fee, and then you would schedule an interview appointment, and then you would bring all the supporting documentation we discussed to that interview appointment. Now, if you apply with the USCIS, the USCIS process, like sometimes also like the employers don't want to do it because there are kind of like a higher kind of fees associated with that process. You have to file an I-129 petition that has filing fee. If you want to premium process it, there is another extra fee for that. So you would file, those two forms and then all those supporting documents to USCIS. And if you do file under premium processing, the great advantage is that you would have a decision in 15 business days. And once you have an approval, you can start working for the company.
Excellent. And so both of those two options, those are the only two options available for nationals of Mexico. For nationals of Canada, both of those options are available, and exactly what you just said would apply to nationals of Canada, either applying at a consulate in Canada or through USCIS in the US. But what is the third option that is the huge benefit for nationals of Canada?
Yeah, so the third option is to apply at a port of entry. So it can be at a land port of entry or at one of the pre-clearance locations in Canada. And really, I would say like 98% of our Canadian clients, like everyone applies at a port of entry just because it's so it's so simple. Like you don't have to like wait to schedule an appointment. Like you don't have to file a petition with USCIS. You just bring all the documents we discussed and you show up at a port of entry and you apply, and then the CBP officers makes a determination on that day, like a couple minutes later, whether they approve the TN visa application. So the port of entry application, it's just such a great advantage, and the Canadian clients have.
Absolutely. And the application packet at a port of entry would really just look like what you described for a consulate, but without the DS-160.
Exactly.
Right. Perfect. So you mentioned that if someone is already in the US and applying through USCIS, which is the only way you can apply through USCIS is if the applicant's in the US in general, that the employer has to sign the I-129, the application form. So that is an example of something an employer would need to do. Something else we talked about was, of course, the employer letter, which again is really the heart of a TN application, and the employer needs to sign that. But I want to take a step back on this question because probably one of the most common questions we get is, what responsibilities does a TN place on the employer? And I think a lot of employers are reluctant to do a TN or support a TN employee because they think it requires sponsorship, like what an H-1B would, or even a green card where they need to test the market, see if there's a U.S. Candidate, pay a prevailing wage, which is higher than minimum wage. Could you clear the air for us and explain, at the end of the day, what are the employer responsibilities, and maybe break it up into the employer responsibilities before the application is filed and the employer responsibilities after the application's approved?
Yeah, so, the employer's obligation, so in case you are applying at a port of entry or at a consulate, really the only obligation the TN employer has is to sign. Obviously they have to review the letter, make sure, they have to write the letter. It only has to have truthful information. But they do, the only obligation they have is to sign that TN letter. In case you are applying through USCIS, they do have to sign those additional forms. So the I-129 form, the I-907 form, the premium processing, in case they want to file under premium processing. But yeah, it's kind of, even in our experience, like many employers, like when they hear like, oh, a person needs visa, like they get like, they don't want to do anything. And it's really important. And what we have done also in the past, is to explain to them, they don't have to, they only have to, sign the letter, explaining, what the person will be doing in the US, but they don't have to, they don't have to do anything else. And, because many employers, if they have done H-1B visas in the past or green cards, they may think the TN is kind of similar in that aspect, but it's not. So it's really kind of important to explain to them they don't have all these additional obligations. What we have also done in the past is, we have kind of a template email kind of explaining to the employers, these are your only obligations, your only obligation is to sign the TN letter. It's the TN visa is not kind of the, there is no sponsorship required as there is for the other visas. So, we are always happy to kind of advocate for our clients and jump on a call with the employer and kind of explain to them, what is and what is not needed for the TN.
Absolutely. No, that is very helpful. And I think what you said about being willing to hop on a phone call with the employer is really important. And I know personally that a number of employers, they tend to think in a binary way. Either you don't require sponsorship and you're basically a U.S. employee, or you're not a U.S. employee and you do require sponsorship. And the TN is in this middle area. So I think that's a really important reminder. So let's switch gears a little bit. Before you did briefly refer to some challenging TN categories. You mentioned the management consulting category. You said before and that the regulations list out the occupations, but not all those occupations are created equal. Some are more difficult than others. Could you talk about that a little bit? Which occupations are particularly challenging?
So I would say what I see a lot is the management consultant. It's one category that allows people to qualify. They don't have to have a degree and they can just qualify based on their work experience. So many people, many people are coming to the US to do a management consultant job, but many people are just trying to fit their job under the management consultant category. So that's why, the government really started scrutinizing the TN management consultant applications a lot. So that's definitely one. I would say for management consultants, there are some instances when still, it's a kind of straightforward petition. For example, when someone is coming to the US to perform a management consultant job for, a huge consulting company, that consulting company has clients it consults to, and, you are coming to, be a management consultant, that's a very straightforward TN visa application. Now, when it becomes a little bit more difficult is when, you are coming to the US as a management consultant. You will be working as an employee of the US company, and let's say that even the US company is on a smaller size, so it has 20 employees, and you are coming to work for a company as a management consultant. So I would say in that case, it's just those if you have if there is really need for a management consultant. The need will have to be kind of described in the TN letter. The job duties will have to describe, like why this company really has a need for a management consultant. Why do they need you? It could still be a very approvable case, but it is going to be a riskier case. I would say in those cases also, the TN visa can be issued up to 3 years. And sometimes in these cases, it's just much more difficult to argue that this company will really need you for a period of 3 years. So sometimes, in these types of cases, the company, we kind of write a letter, so it's for a period of maybe 1.5 to 2 years, because it's really difficult to argue, especially if the company is really small, that they will have a need for a management consultant for a period of full 3 years. And another thing is, for these types of TN visa applications, when you are coming to the US to work as an employee of a US company as a management consultant, you would want to show that kind of like this role is supernumerary, kind of like an extra role, and it's kind of connected with kind of like the period for which the TN can be approved, because you would want to show that this is not kind of like a permanent role, like you are really coming to the US, like let's say that the company is doing a new project and they need you to consult to the management on kind of like this specific project. You would want to kind of describe and kind of like in detail in the TN letter and show that, this will not be a permanent kind of position.
Great. That is very helpful information to keep in mind. I think the fact that the management consultant role doesn't require a degree, a lot of people just are funneled into it if they don't have a degree, and certainly the government is aware of that and will scrutinize those.
Yeah, definitely.
You mentioned that that TN status can be granted for up to 3 years, which leads to my next question for you, which is how often does the visa need to be renewed, and are there any limits to the number of times someone can renew a TN visa or TN status?
Yeah, so Canadian nationals can get TN for up to 3 years, and then after 3 years they would have to renew. There is no limit as to how many times you can renew. The only thing is that you do have to show that you are coming to the US temporarily and you do plan to come back after your TN status expires. I will say that this really doesn't become an issue, so like let's say that you studied in Canada, you worked in Canada, and you are coming to the US, you like never lived here, like the intent is not really going to become an issue like the first time you apply for a TN, not maybe even the second time, but at some point, like let's say that you have been living in the US for 10 years, at some point, like you will want to bring kind of like additional documents with you to those TN interviews, just to kind of show that you do have ties, to your home country, and you do plan to return. For Mexican nationals, so Mexican nationals can get the TN visa either for a period of 1 year or for 4 years. There is a difference in the reciprocity fee for the 1 year and the 4 year visa, but if you are a Mexican national, definitely get the visa. I believe like the fee for 1 year is around like $80, and for 4 years it's something above like $300, so it's not that high of a difference. So we always recommend to let the officer know at the interview that you want the visa for 4 years, because it will allow you to travel internationally during the period of the period of 4 years. But one thing to keep in mind for Mexican nationals is that even if you are issued the visa for 1 year, you will be generally admitted to the US for a period of up to 3 years. And the same thing is, if you have the visa for 4 years, you will be only allowed to stay in the US for a period of 3 years. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is that you will not be allowed to stay the full 4 year period. So, and this is also just a general comment to, TN visa holders, or basically anyone in the US on any visa status. Always check your I-94 on the CBP website, make sure that you are admitted in the correct visa category, Always pay attention to the end date on the I-94, because you don't want to overstay that date.
A really critical reminder about the I-94 there. So thank you for that, Michaela. The final question I have for you regarding the TN is, again, a question that comes up that our clients raise with some frequency, which is whether the TN visa leads to a green card. And, let's say you're in the US working for a TN employer, and you meet someone, you fall in love, or your TN employer really likes you, wants to sponsor you for a green card. What does that process look like going from a TN to a green card? And again, acknowledging this is a very complex question, and I will just quickly say that if anyone is looking at this, it is important to work with a lawyer. But Michaela, what thoughts do you have on that?
Yeah, so, the TN doesn't lead automatically to a green card. And this is actually interesting because I think there are some countries in the world, if you kind of live in a country for a certain period of time and, reside there, pay taxes, at some point, you may apply for some sort of permanent residency or citizenship. And we have even our clients ask all the time, I've been living here for 10 to 15 years. I pay US taxes, my family is here, I live here. Can I just get the green card? The answer is then, unfortunately, the US immigration system, it doesn't work like that. There is no special, category for, to qualify for a green card just based on your residency. So for the TN, let's say that you have been working for your TN employer for, long period of time, and you want to kind of switch to a green card, what options do you have? So one option, I would say, the most common for TN visa holders would be to switch or apply for a green card through the PERM process. So that would be the EB2 or EB3 green card category. The US employer, they would have to, be willing to kind of go through the process and sponsor you for a green card. So that's one, I would say the most common option. There could be other options such as maybe the extraordinary ability green card or maybe the NIW, but I would say that the PERM is the most common. If you, have a family member such as spouse, who wants to sponsor you for a green card and you are here on the TN, definitely an option as well. One, as you mentioned, Dustin, already, I would say the most important thing to keep in mind is the timing. So, as we said, from the beginning, the TN is a single intent, it's a non-immigrant visa. So, at some point, if you apply for a green card, at some point in that process, if you have a green card petition pending or an I-140 petition pending, which is a green card petition by the employer, it would be very hard for you to renew the TN visa because, the officer would probably question and would probably suspect that you want to come to the US and you would adjust your status and apply for a green card because, the employer is sponsoring you for the green card. So timing and kind of planning for this will be the key. If you are planning to switch to a green card, either based on employment or marriage, definitely advisable to schedule a call with an immigration attorney to kind of guide you through this process.
Great, thank you. And Michaela, this brings us to the end of our episode. To wrap up, given your personal journey and the years you've been representing and advocating for people who are themselves navigating the immigration journey, do you have any final thoughts or pieces of wisdom or advice for our listeners?
Yeah, so, what really kind of, what I love about my job is, that I can kind of, help people, guide them through the immigration journey and kind of, just kind of be able to work with, all the different clients from all the different countries in the world we have. It's really my pleasure. Like our clients are, applying for employment-based visas, are very, accomplished professionals in their home countries. We have clients who, are willing to kind of move their lives from their home countries, invest money to the US and kind of like move across the world to the US. So I think that takes great courage, so it's always my pleasure to kind of guide people on their, on their immigration journey and be able to advise them, on what different options they have.
Wonderful. Well, Michaela, thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. To our listeners, thank you. Please subscribe, leave a review, share this podcast with anyone who might be thinking about building a business in the United States. Everyone stay safe, stay well, and we hope to see you soon.